Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Late Night Learning. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Palomba. Now today we're going to wrap up our discussion on media economics. So in the first lecture, we were talking about different media industries and thinking about differences and similarities across industries that make media and entertainment unique to study. In this lecture, we're going to be looking at different principles upon which to introduce products to consumers, thinking about the lowest common denominator, thinking about the principle of duplication, and thinking about a few other things as well. Let's get started. And so in our last discussion, we were talking about preference externalities. We were talking about audience preferences, just thinking about conceptually that when we put a plate of food out for our consumers at perhaps a Chinese buffet, we have to know that a lot of people are going to like it. Just as you would as a big, impressive media manager at Comedy Central or HBO, you have to put out something that you believe a lot of people will like. Heterogeneity of consumer preferences and product differentiation are also two other items to consider when we're thinking about serving our customers in a marketplace. And so audiences all consume different types of media based on background and lifestyle, and we know this. And in fact, channels know this as well. Some channels know this so well that it says it on its name. It says it on its logo. It says it on its brand. BET, Black Entertainment Television. There's no guessing there who that's for. Golf Television. There's really no guessing who that is for. When we think about different labels, these labels are also meant to attract certain people. Could be racial, ethnic backgrounds, could be gender, and it could be lifestyles as well. And so it also means, though, that if I am a media manager, this also means that if I am a media manager at Black Entertainment Television, BET, I am targeting African Americans primarily, but at the cost of ignoring Caucasians, Asian Americans, and Hispanic Americans. Now, of course, that isn't to say that Caucasians don't watch BET. Of course they do. Of course Asian Americans watch BET. Of course Hispanic Americans watch BET. But it is to say that my resources, my programming, and my overall vision for this network will predominantly be African American centric, if you will. If we think about popular music, we might think about targeting, let's say, African Americans if I am a sports team, or maybe I'm a food company, or a soda company, or a housing company. I could be any kind of company, and let's just say for whatever reason, I'm very much interested in going after the African American community. I might think about, if I'm going to advertise on a radio station, well, how many African Americans like rap? How many like hip hop, R&B? How many like alternative rock? What about merengue? Well, all of these genres are going to help me decide where to put my advertisement, where to figure out how to reach these audiences. In order to do this, though, there are a few models that we can look at to help us get a better sense of some of the decisions these managers have to make. Let's move along. Advertising finance is also something that is very, very crucial in the development of securing a media product or service. Advertisements are usually either the sole or at least the major source of revenue. The goal of a media organization is to produce content to consumer groups that advertisers want. This does get into a two-sided market, which we will talk about in a second. But advertisements really are one of two sources of revenue, right? Either I charge Jenna a subscription fee to my streaming video on demand service, or I have to insert advertisements. That's really it, at least for now. And so the goal of a media organization is to produce content to consumer groups, really that advertisers want. And so it's really interesting to think about all of the challenges that advertisers face trying to figure out where to advertise and the challenges that TV channels face. I have to tell McDonald's that, hey, I have a lot of high schoolers, let's say, that watch my programs. Or I have people perhaps from a lower socioeconomic stratum who purchase McDonald's more so than people who are wealthier. And I might be able to say to McDonald's, listen, these are the recent Nielsen ratings and advertising impressions on my website. We can pinpoint this to geographic locations in the United States, and primarily they seem to be from houses that have a lower median household income. And so it seems to me that those are the people that you are looking for, McDonald's, and I, as CBS or NBC, can give you that audience that you're seeking. So a lot of these discussions are always going on, and it's crucial for advertisers to really look for where their consumers are going and to meet them there. Let's move along. So the principle of duplication, which was something that I referenced earlier, is a principle that came out in 1952, and there are certain portions of this that are no longer supported by the way in which media is structured. But this is a really nice model to just get our feet wet in what goes on in media economics. Each viewer is worth the same amount to advertisers. This was true at one point. This was true at one point when we had CBS, NBC, and ABC as 3 television channels. And there was nobody else there. And it was also true because we had mom, dad, sister, brother, everybody watched the one television set they had, and there really was no differentiation. That's really no longer true. Viewers are worth very different rates now, more so than ever before. Because we have so many platforms, we're really able to figure out who's using what at what time. This, however, is still true. Each media platform tries to attract as many viewers to advertisers as possible. Each viewer has one preferred genre choice. It's kind of a major limitation to the model. We know that some consumers may have multiple preferences for multiple genres. If several platforms exhibit the same genre, such as comedy across movies, television, and radio, audiences are split evenly, as there really is no competition. And that kind of is still true. For the most part, comedy across movies, television, and radio really don't interfere with each other, so to speak. If I'm interested in listening to comedy radio, if I want to listen to Aziz Ansari on a podcast, or him doing stand-up, which I highly recommend, then I'm going to listen to a radio or a podcast. After all, I'm in the car. I don't really have any other options. Now, do I? Okay. Reed Hastings, though, of Netflix recently said that one of his biggest competitors was Fortnite. That's right. Netflix said Fortnite, not HBO, not other SVOD services, not other TV channels. Fortnite was one of its biggest competitors. And so even this principle, comedy across movies, television, radio, sometimes doesn't hold water, because there are instances, especially today, in which some TV SVOD services may view video games as competition, which was laughable 15 years ago, very much laughable 25 years ago. Because remember, if you're going to play a video game, you're not really in the mood to watch television, now are you? But as we blur the lines between traditional and new media, and as it becomes easier and easier and easier to multitask in the living room, and to switch from Netflix to playing on the PlayStation to listening to Pandora, platforms are actually starting to compete a little bit more than probably was anticipated or prognosticated even a decade ago. The more popular genre attracts too many platforms, wasteful copying, and high social cost. This is possible if we think about this a little bit more critically. If there are more channels, however, preference externalities disappear as more tailored content can be produced, which assumes lower fixed costs. So let's back up a little bit here. The more popular genre attracts too many platforms. If we think about the explosion of reality television in the last 20 years, that's been huge. Really, reality television has been around for the last 50 or 60 years or so with Candid Camera and a few other shows like Queen for a Day. But modern reality television really took off with The Real World on MTV. And if any of you have not seen The Real World, please catch a clip. It's some of the most incredible television out there. I had one of the incredible privileges of meeting the executive producer of The Real World, who is now working on Born This Way. I highly recommend it. But if we look at reality television, it's become more expensive over time because now there's wasteful copying, there's high social cost, and we also have reality genres in other mediums as well. We have podcasts that capture reality-based content as well now. And so you could argue there's wasteful copying and high social cost. And because we have so many channels, we've had a lot of wasteful copying and high social cost because we've seen a lot of the same reality television on Bravo, on VH1, on MTV, even on CBS, ABC, and Fox. And so preference externalities do disappear, so to speak, in this because we have more tailored content that can be produced when we have 100 TV channels. So even if reality television is everywhere, many of you are probably sitting right now saying, yeah, but it doesn't really affect me. And it really doesn't, because with the amount of content available to you, even if reality television is on 10, 15 channels, it really shouldn't matter to you. The goal here is to note that more tailored content can come out because there are so many channels, right? The women who I'm speaking to who are listening right now, you may go to Oxygen, you may go to Lifetime, right? Those channels in particular are geared toward women. Again, it isn't to say that men can't view those channels, but they are particularly geared. One deviation from this lecture, if you are ever watching television and you don't know who this channel is for, watch the advertisements. Advertisements on a TV channel will always tell you who the channel is meant for ideally. Again, nobody's saying you can't watch whatever you want, but these TV channels in particular have an audience to go after. And for Lifetime and for Oxygen, it's primarily women, slightly older women, in fact. I believe their demo is about 25 to 45, if memory serves right. And so getting back to lecture here, duplication of popular channels comes through here. The market solution, what is most profitable, often doubles up on the more lucrative niche. And so over the last 18 years, we have seen a boom of reality television because it's been so profitable. One of my mentors at Bravo, a VP over there, has told me that, the cost to produce a reality television show is about 1 to 4 to a scripted show. What does that mean? That means if Jordan is producing The Real Housewives of Jersey City, it's probably going to cost him $1 million compared to a scripted version, which will likely cost him $2 million, $3 million, even $4 million. That's that ratio that I was talking about. So yes, one of the biggest key things to note here is that reality television is largely way less expensive than other content. And that's why it's been pushed so hard. It's very cheap to make. The first few seasons, sometimes actors and actresses and others involved aren't paid, or they're kind of compensated in time on camera. And so it's very easy to make a profit from reality television. And there is low risk. And you don't really need to be invested in the characters to watch an episode either, depending upon, of course, what kind of reality television show it is. So it does lend itself to the casual viewer as well. Let's move along. Continuing on Steiner's principle of duplication, generally speaking, majority tastes will override minority tastes. This is largely still true. There's a reason why Stranger Things has been so popular on Netflix. There's a reason why Orange is the New Black has been so popular on Netflix. Those majority tastes in those programs, to an extent, have overridden minority tastes because those two shows are constantly highlighted and hyped by the Netflix marketing team in lieu of other content that's on Netflix, right? And so there is an exception here, of course, with Netflix, which has, I believe now, over 2,000 television shows and something like 500 movies on its service, although those numbers are always changing. There really is no concern about majority and minority tastes, right? For Netflix, the goal is the next TV show that I adopt from Nicole, will that particular show get me more subscribers? That really is the business model for Netflix, for Hulu, for Amazon Go, for HBO as well. If I put out another Game of Thrones spinoff, if I put out another Game of Thrones prequel, if I'm HBO, will that give me more subscribers? I don't care who watches it. I really don't. I care about gaining subscribers and curtailing the amount of subscribers I lose. Limiting the amount of subscribers I lose, but really gaining more and more subscribers. That's really the goal here. And so to combat this, and this happened in the 80s and 90s, we allowed for channel monopolies. And so all comedy was directed to Comedy Central at one point, right? Comedy Central and HBO went back and forth in the 90s, and then HBO really had ultimately risen above it, although Comedy Central did put out a lot of different TV series that were geared toward comedy, including Chappelle's Show, which is one of the greatest shows to premiere on Comedy Central. Monopolies can outperform wasteful competition as well. And so if Comedy Central has a monopoly on comedy, then it can outperform wasteful competition. If NBC during the 90s or CBS during the 90s attempted to get into comedy, and of course there are always sitcoms with Friends and Seinfeld and all of those great shows in the 90s, it really wasn't to the level of Comedy Central. Remember, Comedy Central is a cable channel, and so it was not restricted by FCC regulations, which cover particular kinds of violence and cursing and nudity and sexual expression, right? Comedy Central had more pull, they had more leeway, and they continue to, with what they can do and say on their channel versus CBS and NBC. If you have seen Chappelle's Show, that show would and will never be on network television due to its content. And so if there are enough television channels, radio stations, and other platforms, minority audiences will eventually be served, but many resources will be wasted. And so this was particularly relevant during the great golden age of cable and satellite. Late 70s, really into the 2000s, let's say. I would say the last decade, it's been kind of a transition with SVOD. I don't think SVOD is replacing television. I just think it's a supplementation. Although we'll see in the future how SVOD really does upturn the cable and satellite marketplace down the line. If 30% of a market is drama and the other 70% is comedy, but advertisers believe drama audiences are worth 5 times as much as comedy audiences, they may pay $150 for drama and they may pay $70 for comedy. Don't underestimate advertisers. Advertisers will have a say in the kind of content that could be put out and where they want to put their advertisements. If they watch an episode of South Park on Comedy Central, I don't know why I have Comedy Central on the brain during this lecture. If they watch an episode of South Park, which is a very graphic show to say it mildly, advertisers may interject that they don't want a particular kind of content to appear, or they may pull out. This happened with Family Guy, a Fox show about 20 years ago. The episode was entitled When You Wish Upon a Weinstein. And in the particular show, there were references to being Jewish. And so some advertisers pulled out immediately and were furious with Fox for airing that. They didn't want their advertised brands being synonymous or associated with that kind of graphic content that could offend audiences. And so advertisers always play a role here. Even if you figured out your audience, even if you figured out what you're going to put out, particularly when it comes to violence and content that could be offensive, advertisers are always at the table, so to speak. Let's move along. Beeb, 1977. lowest common denominator. This is another great model in understanding how media managers make decisions in who their audience is and also who to best serve. Now we're looking at the Tampa, Florida radio market here. Viewers have taste rankings over program types. What kind of music do you prefer? Are you into country music? Are you into rap? Let's say that if we looked at the Tampa, Florida market, country music is about 60% of people's first choice, and rap music is about 40% of people's first choice if available. If I am turning the radio dial, I'm hoping to hear country or I'm hoping to hear rap. Let's just say it breaks down 60-40, even though that's probably unlikely. However, if I look at people's second choices that are available, jazz is 80% of people's second choice. What do I do here? Do I give people country music? Do I give people rap music? Or do I say, you know what? 80% of you like jazz. No, it's not your first choice, but that's a lot of audience members. And smooth jazz tends to attract audiences that make a higher income. And that likely means they like luxury brands. Ooh. I'm going to go after jazz. And so you can see here in this radio market, and you can apply this really anywhere, especially among the legacy media companies, perhaps not so much the new media companies. Choice is crucial in determining what you want to give to whom. Who deserves or needs or wants your product? Here we can see that jazz might be the ticket. Let's move along. In larger markets, media firms tend to earn higher revenue. And of course, this is associated with higher costs. So if we look at Tampa, Tampa's probably about a mid-major market, right? Probably about a top 30 market, if memory serves right. These costs, though, are indicative of higher investment in high-quality products. And so higher shares of consumers are drawn to consumption in markets with more products too. And so in Tampa, you may be a little bit more limited in the kind of radio channels that you listen to, or perhaps the kind of television channels that you get. But in bigger markets, like a New York City, like a Los Angeles, like a Miami, like a Chicago or Boston, these markets are so huge, they tend to have more. They tend to offer more content. There's a reason why in New York City you have, for instance, if we're talking about distribution and not content, you have available to you some 6, 7, 8 satellite and cable companies who will come to your house and outfit you with the latest and greatest to secure access to channels. Smaller markets are limited a bit more. And so in smaller markets, you may see that second choice that we saw earlier. If I am in Galveston, Texas, and if I don't have a big audience to begin with, and 80% of you like jazz, jazz is what's going to be played. There's no question about it. Let's move along. And so if we look at market size effect continued, larger markets do promote entry into markets as well, so be careful with that. You may say to yourself, oh, New York, this is great. I get to kind of start my new SVOD service. Yeah, well, guess what? You've entered into a bigger market, and so that's kind of what you're facing. If you're a new radio station, a new podcast in New York City, great. But so many people want to be here because it's such a big market. Good luck. So it's very, very complex, and it's very competitive for that matter. Larger markets, of course, can support more products. We have more newspaper brands in New York, more TV shows shot here in New York, more radio shows and radio stations in New York. And so this means that if there are more entrants into a big market, prices may also fall. So we know when we have a very large supply, prices may fall, right? If there's too much radio, if there's too much television, if there's too much film, then products may fall in price. And so the relationship between variety and market size is dependent on consumer interest in engaging in second choice alternatives. That's where the rub lies. Can you figure out the second choice alternatives for your audiences, and then does it supersede your first choice that may be available, that may be most popular? Do we need it? Do we really need to do country rock? 60% of the market, according to the Tampa market, but jazz is 80%. As the market grows and more variety is encouraged, consumers may leave LCD, lowest common denominator, and switch to preferred variety, which may or may not impact LCD percentage in marketplace. And so it's important to note here that consumers may leave lowest common denominator in a Tampa if it grows by 2 million. And why wouldn't you? If Tampa is on the rise, if Seattle's on the rise, if other places are on the rise, from the perspective of a media manager, you may think about expanding that marketplace. Let's move along. The two-sided marketplace I spoke about earlier. Two-sided marketplace is really what we're looking at when we think of media and advertisement. There is first a media intermediary. That could be a television channel, and it could be a radio station. It brings a consumer base to consume media interspersed by advertisements, commercials, and product placement. And so we have two exchanges that go on here. One, we have advertisers who purchase media time on a media platform. And so I, McDonald's, Starbucks, go to NBC and say, I want to purchase ad time. And Starbucks is advertised all over NBC. There's also a lot of product placement on shows like Will and Grace with Starbucks. Starbucks purchases time. In exchange, NBC receives money. That's one market. The second market, and why all these markets are two-sided, is that audiences are sold to advertisers. Yes, you all are commodities. You are all sold, although you don't have any price tags. But people will say that you're worth different things. It's very interesting, complex algorithms at stake. Nevertheless, you are an audience that is sold to advertisers. And in fact, advertisers ask the following. They ask you to watch the commercials and consider their brands. TV channels ask you to watch the advertisements, and in exchange, will give you content to watch. That's fun. And there are a few ways in which that we're able to measure this a little bit better with audience engagement. First, there are usage externalities. We may look at, as advertisers, we may look at credit cards, click-through advertisements, platform charges, member per interaction as well. And so we may say to ourselves, well, I showed this Purina Puppy Chow commercial on television. How many clicks on the website did we receive an hour after the show? What about a day? What about a week? What's the KPI? What's the key performance indicator that we're interested in when we're trying to figure out ad effectiveness? Additionally, we may also look at participation externalities, club memberships, platform charges, member for access. And so members are responsible for determining amount of action after access. So that is more in line with cable and direct TV. Whereas with usage externalities, we are looking at singular usages. We are looking at singular purchases. And that's why I have movies for usage externalities. Each of you purchase a ticket when you go to a movie theater. It's very purposeful when we think about usage externalities. Participation externalities, we ask people to pay a subscription. We don't know all the time how much people use of it. It's usually proprietary. It's usually held within the company itself. Typically in media consumption, one's participation in media consumption has no impact on the well-being of others. If Jordan is watching a particular program, or if Anicia is catching a particular sports program, Anicia might say, well, I'm watching the Yankees, but I mean, it's not really affecting Anthony, so what does it matter? And she'd be right. Typically in media consumption, one's participation in media consumption has no impact. And that's pretty big and significant when we think about other markets. If I buy a house, it will absolutely impact your ability to purchase the house. You are not moving in. And so in media and entertainment, the cost of distribution at this point is very, very low, which is not the case for a lot of other industries. It still costs a ton of money to ship medical equipment. It still costs a ton of money to ship cars. But in the media and entertainment industries, the cost for shipment declines further and further the more technology-oriented our content is. Newer services are sometimes one-sided markets as well, in which there's a set price and there's no advertisements. And we can see that with Hulu, Netflix, HBO, Sirius, Pandora, Spotify. Yes, there are options for advertisements with some of these particular services, but by and large, it's a one-sided market. You get it, you sign up, and you're done. The question is this a sustainable model? And so far, it seems to be the case that it in fact is. However, Netflix right now is kind of burning up its cash or its ability to retain revenue as it moves further and further into debt. If you're curious about what Netflix is charging per subscriber, I believe there's a $10.99 and a $12.99 platform charges for its services right now, although that fluctuates, and I believe there's also a basic $8.99 as well. Is this a sustainable model? It's very curious as these one-sided markets pop up to think about what these companies are actually getting. On the one hand, they're getting a lot of consumer participation. What I mean by that is that they can see all of the click points that you execute when you're looking at something. Netflix knows that you watched the first half of the second season of The Sinner and were kind of creeped out that a boy could actually kill his parents. Sorry for the spoiler. On the other hand, Netflix is missing out on advertising revenue, but they are getting a large sense of who their consumer is and perhaps who likes their product, and to really think about how they're going to reach other prospective people. Data is now more valuable than oil. And if you don't believe me, there's a cover story by The Economist on that very subject. I strongly recommend reading it. And so just as 100 years ago, we had oil barons and we had tycoons and other people racing to exploit oil, we now have people racing to exploit data. And in a lot of these one-sided marketplaces, there are tremendous opportunities to learn specifically about audiences. Remember, with cable, with satellite, terrestrial radio, network television, it's very difficult to get a handle on audiences because that information is proprietary for cable and satellite companies. And so to have some sort of aggregate information on your audience is difficult. Surveys, focus groups, Nielsen ratings, other items that may be available for conducting research are regularly used by these particular firms. But until they become one-sided markets, they do lose out on learning about their audiences. And so that's why Comcast NBC is introducing an app, an SVOD service. It's why Disney Plus is coming out. It's why Time Warner is coming out as well. It's why HBO, which is going to feature HBO on it, is coming out. All of these platforms want to learn more about consumers, and they also want to be more flexible with the kind of content that they're giving to their consumers. The final thing I'll say before I wrap this up is that there's a certain stickiness to these one-sided markets in particular. It's in a lot of marketing literature. A lot of marketing studies look at the stickiness factor. Can you kind of stick your audience in something kind of like a web? When was the last time you shopped for a gallon of milk? Talk about a deviation. When was the last time you shopped for a gallon of milk? If you go to the grocery store, ShopRite, Publix, wherever you may be, Wegmans, you may have to go to the other side of the store to get the milk. But milk, at least until the last 5 years, has been one of the biggest staples in a kitchen. Why do they put it in the back? So you walk through the entire store. So hopefully you'll pick up more products. This same phenomenon is seen on the menus of Hulu, definitely on the menus of Netflix, in which what you've recently watched is sometimes dropped to the 6th or 7th row. That's done on purpose. They know that you're very likely to keep watching what you were watching, to go through what you were going to go through. They don't care about that. What they do care about is the next thing you're going to watch, which will keep you moving along as a good subscriber. And so stickiness is a unique feature in these one-sided markets. Well, that's all the time we have on Late Night Learning. As always, keep laughing and keep learning.